What does the data tell you?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. I would say this, when it comes to Apple and China, we know over the last few years the growth has not been there. But the comment I will take you back to what they said in their last earnings call is they grew in China while all third-party data providers were saying that China shipments are down. Now there is always a timing issue in terms of when the product is shipped out of the warehouse versus when it's activated, when it's recognized as revenue. So I think next week's earnings is going to be extremely important to see what's really going on in China for Apple. And I think because, to be fairly blunt, that is the most important thing for over the next 12 months for Apple, far more than anything else at this point.
The way in which the IDC tracks the data, whether it's government, whether it's actually seeing what third parties are really up to, we can sort of try and dig into the nuance there, Anurag. But the overall narrative seems to be that Apple loses position and Huawei gains. Is that the right one to make?
Oh, yeah, but that's because over the last 12 months, we have seen a massive upgrade in Huawei phones. But there's a reason for it, because Huawei hadn't, launched a phone for several years. So the people who had the older phones were going out and refresh that or buy the newer ones. Whereas, as we know, for Apple iPhones, we are seeing an elongation in the refresh cycle because the product's been, a far more reliable product as well as it's expensive. So people are keeping it longer. So that's really has been the biggest issue for Apple for over the last, I would say, 2.5 years or so.
The domestic Chinese handset makers are a factor here, right, Anurag? And Bloomberg's reported about government policy directing government employees or state-backed enterprises to leave the iPhone at home. How do you model that at Bloomberg Intelligence, that kind of policy perspective?
Yeah, and again, as I said, going into the last quarter earnings, all of these things were, at play at that time too. Meanwhile, Apple came out and said that they grew in the Greater China region, and that's why I am more inclined to wait for Apple's comments rather than any of the data sources. But having said that, I think Apple is going to have a bit of a tough time if you see the Republican, president coming in, because if the China rhetoric is going to go up over the next 2 to 3 years, Apple's going to be right in the middle of the U.S.-China issue. So I think really Apple's not as clear-cut at this point compared to, let's say somebody like an Amazon or Microsoft in terms of the visibility over the next 2 to 3 years.